Hello. Our story begins inside the medical facilities on Polis Massa. Padme Amidala was dead. She had just given birth to twins, Luke and Leia. The three of her friends that were here were Jedi Masters Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, and Senator Bail Organa. What came next was, they were unsure actually. Obi-Wan walked away from Yoda and Bail to oversee the preparation for the twins. There were a couple things that needed to be done before they were allowed to leave the facilities. It wasn't anything bad, just galactic standards for infants. Obi-Wan watched over with sadness. He'd be taking one of these twins, surely. He didn't want to admit it to himself, but the reality is, the twins needed to be taken care of, and they probably had to be split up. If the Emperor got to them, then he could fulfill his evil legacy. While he was looking over the twins, a familiar presence washed over him. Master Plo walked through the building after having seen two Senators' vessels. He knew that Polis Massa was one of the places for Jedi Masters to go to. He'd already been to locations inside the core and mid-rim before stopping here. Each location had a place of refuge. In the core, it was Tython, which was the location of one of the original temples. He also went to Tempest, which was in the Outer Rim, location of a High Republic outpost, even going to the wreckage at Devron, at the Temple of Edith, which was in the colony's location, technically the Inner Rim. Having not seen anyone at any of these locations, he was hopeful that someone would follow the path. Plo knew that if Jedi were to relocate, they needed to get away from the conflict. He didn't quite understand what this conflict was, but Tython, Deveron, and Tempest all had directions to another location. Plo was hopeful he would find someone, and he finally did. But when he walked in and found Yoda, he was surprised to say the least. Plo's journey hadn't been easy. He was hopping from ship to ship to avoid capture. After the clones turned on him on Keda Nemodia, he ejected last second and watched his ship crash into a building. Before he escaped the planet, he helped the injured out, and then, at some point, stole a Republic shuttle. It was in the early morning upon his return to the temple on Coruscant. The smoke was still billowing out. When he tried to make a landing, he was chased off-world, so he broke it to Tython, before going to two other planets. He at the moment was currently running out of fuel, and he knew that council members were to regroup at Polis Massa, so he came here last, hoping someone would still be alive. The fact that Yoda was here brought him hope, but something was different. Prior to his understanding of what happened to Yoda, Obi-Wan walked out, and their conversation began. It wouldn't be until hours later that Plo would understand what happened to the Grand Master. Sure, losing was hard, but they couldn't give up their fight. Not now. Maybe Plo was being too hardy, something he wasn't particularly known for, but he couldn't believe this. How could these two Jedi be so open to forgoing the way? Yoda was going to split the twins up, send Leia to Alderaan with Bail, and send Luke to Tatooine with Owen and Beru. But Plo wouldn't stand for that. How could they be so hopeless? Before Bail could call dibs for a potential daughter, Plo stood up. The force of which he stood up put both Jedi on edge for a hot minute. He turned to them both and expressed his shame. How could they have fallen so far? They didn't have any desire to fix this? If they didn't believe they could fight the Empire, then why not train the twins from birth? If he trained them from birth, then perhaps there was a chance for them to be a challenge to Palpatine. If Skywalker was in fact dead, then these twins were their last hope. Plo told them that they couldn't continue down this path. If they wanted to, he wouldn't. They were on their own, and they would forsake the Jedi to oblivion. The Jedi Master walked off. The Tantive 4 hadn't left the planet yet, and the Republic shuttle he stole would be refueled. As he walked towards the twins, he could hear Obi-Wan's boots walking up behind him. He asked Plo what he was doing, and Master Plo turned back and asked Obi-Wan why they were so adamant on forgetting about their mandate to the galaxy. Plo hadn't even heard Obi-Wan's message to the Jedi across the galaxy, but he could not believe that Kenobi of all people was willing to give up on Anakin's children. He should have been the first to tell Yoda that they shouldn't be split up, and that they should be trained. Doing anything less than that would be a disservice to not just the galaxy but Padme and Anakin. Plo expressed his shame in that he wished that it wouldn't come to this, but he was leaving now. There was no one that would stop him. Kenobi tried to find words, but what could he say? He just watched Luke and Leia get whisked out of his life. Plo quickly left Polis Massa after gathering up supplies. Yoda approached Obi-Wan and informed him that they'd be going to Dagobah to complete his training. It would be a lie to suggest that neither master was affected by Plo's words and actions, but what could they do now? Just like they were in reaction to the Sith, they were too slow to collect their thoughts and process what happened before their very eyes. They were failures to themselves and their order. Plo called them out on it, and now all that was left were the consequences of their inaction. Master Plo knew where to go, taking the twins to Lothal. It was the same location he left behind at every location he stopped at before he came to Polis Massa. Plo hoped for the best, but he was unsure if anyone had seen his little message. When he arrived, it seemed as if his hopes had been proven wrong. There was no one. He gave specific coordinates too. This left an even more dismaying feeling inside of his chest. He didn't believe anyone would go straight there, but the idea that it was just Obi-Wan, Yoda, and himself was almost too much to bear. He landed the shuttle outside the Jedi Temple in Lothal and began setting up a camp. The twins were the quietest infants he'd ever interacted with. Hopefully, that wasn't a bad omen. Surely they were tired though. They may have only been hours old, but their memories would likely be plagued with the death of their mother. If they were as Force-sensitive as their father, it was entirely likely that one, if not both of them, would remember the sadness that consumed the medical facilities where Padme died. Plo, after having set up a campfire and prepared some crates and such, looked over into the empty fields of the planet. He hoped for the best. Truthfully, he didn't. But he didn't know what came next. Typically in a moment like this, he would consult one of his mentors, whether it be Yoda, Terrace Nube, or someone else. But now he had to trust one thing, and it was the Force. He had to rely on the Force itself. The fire crackled behind him and he looked off in the distance. The children were sleeping by the fire, simply due to him trying to make sure the shuttle conserved as much energy as possible. He stopped in the capital city of Lothal before he landed out here. The shuttle would be operable for about an entire year if he took care of it. That was important for Plo. He had a severe disadvantage, especially when it was in comparison to other Jedi like Kenobi. Plo couldn't just hide in plain sight, even with the hood covering his head, and even if his mask altered his voice to be deeper and more echoey. So just talking could alert the wrong type of attention. He didn't fear that the locals of Lothal would report him to the Empire, but he couldn't be too careful. Even if he was just being paranoid, what he was doing was in greater service of the galaxy. Luke and Leia needed to be protected at all costs. With them asleep, he walked back over towards the fire and knelt down. He told himself to trust the Force. If he continued to neglect it, or be fueled by fear or frustration or even anger, then he would jeopardize everything. He was one with the Force, and the Force was with him. The fire and the soothing wind blowing across the open landscape provided for the perfect ambience to finding his peace through meditation. As he tried, he could feel a beacon through the Force elsewhere on the planet. It surprised him, but not as much as the beeps that rang out from behind him as he turned around to see R2 wheeling down the ramp. Plo turned back and pressed his finger to his mask as the droid slid down next to him. Plo put his hand on the droid's head and asked him quietly what he was doing here. Apparently R2 wanted to be with the twins, taking up the same mandate as Plo, protecting them and looking after them. He just kept quiet until they got here, because he didn't want to get abandoned again, like he did by Anakin on Mustafar. 3PO would be the politician's servant, just without his good friend. Plo told the little droid to go back and be quiet, not in a disregarding or disrespectful way, in just a way to convey that he wanted to meditate. One might assume that a meditation for Plo went swimmingly, but it didn't. He was always one of the more outstanding Jedi in the Order. It's why he was on the Council, but he couldn't even connect. The only thing he had was a beacon that he felt at the beginning, but he never felt that again. His connection to the Force had been tainted by the rise of the Empire. It was the most shame he had felt perhaps in his entire life. The light felt extinguished, the hope had disappeared, and he was left with nothing but shame. He of course blamed himself. One of 13 seats on the highest council inside the Jedi Order, one of 13 individuals that could decide the fate of the Jedi, and as it turned out, the fate of the galaxy. He, just as every other member, stood by idly. Of course he didn't know about Mace's heroic duel with the Chancellor, but he was left to assume that his allies died fighting for the galaxy. He would never know just how close his friend had come to destroying the Sith, if only Anakin hadn't betrayed him. Plo got back up and stepped away from the fires and looked out at the cot he laid out. The two children were concealed, covers atop their infant pods. It would protect them from anything that could try and kill them. He was thankful for those pods, because without them, he wouldn't be able to rest, but as he laid down on his cot, he realized that there would be no sleeping for him. His mind was running laps around his head, chasing after thoughts, all of them making him overthink every action he ever made. He honestly thought he should have been harder on himself, but the truth is, he couldn't be. All of these thoughts led him to rest under the starry night on Lothal. In the morning, he'd be a parent to two children that weren't his. Two children that belonged to people that he wasn't all that close to. Sure, he and Skywalker had a few bonding moments, but he didn't know Padme like Yoda or Obi-Wan. He didn't pity himself for taking up this role either. He just didn't understand how it could come to this. How could two people who should have been there for their friend negate their roles as friends? Were they not strong enough? Foolish? He was unsure. There was no need to slander them either. And this wasn't that. More so, he was just trying to understand why it happened. How else could he come to terms with it if he didn't try to comprehend it? To avoid failure in the future, he must develop knowledge of why they failed in the past. If he refused to do so, then he'd be dooming the twins, the galaxy, and himself. That was something he could not do. Plo took care of the children in the morning, and then when they finally went back to sleep, he went back to a meditation. It would become a cycle, one that remained the same on a daily basis. He had enough supplies to last him around 6 months, simply because Plo was used to a schedule of fasting. The children would eat more than he would throughout the coming months, which was perfectly healthy for him. His time was spent continuously trying to harmonize with the Force once again. The task sounded so simple, but things were never like that. The questions only continued to mount up, and he at this point didn't have the assurance in himself to traverse into the temple behind the camp. R2 was a decent companion, but life was lonely out here. For someone like Plo, who had no issue with being alone, finally found himself yearning for companions. He may have been on the battlefront often, but the clones were always there. When he wasn't there, he was with his brothers and sisters inside the Order. Now, he was alone. Nothing but the animals of Lothal, 2 infants, and an R2 unit. Poor little droid had no one else either. It was truly tragic. Plo, after yet another uneventful day, looked at the temple and walked up to it. He wouldn't enter it. Treading the tall grass of Lothal felt surreal, and the silence in the air aside from the footsteps that he made crept through his ears, in an eerie but transcendent way. There was no explaining it. As the Jedi Master, he reached to the temple and looked up at all of its glory, and wondered if those who constructed it thought that their order would become nothing. 25,000 years of Jedi history, gone in a flash. Plo looked back to the shuttle. The droid and the children were still as statues, and the fire still burned. His head turned back and he raised his hand, laying it gently on the side of the structure. He could feel pulses radiating through the temple, but they didn't give him any closure. There was no freedom from his pain, just a continuation of his insufficient comprehension of what happened. Truthfully, he had lost all concept of time. He tried to keep track, but after the first week, he was unsure. Maybe it was only 3 days. Perhaps it had been 3 months. The reality is, it was only 7 weeks. His life had fallen through the cracks, and despite how highly he held himself, how hard he had pushed himself, and how much he would do for anyone who lived within the temple, he couldn't help but feel like he was the last of the Jedi. Yoda and Obi-Wan were wherever they went, and he was here alone, a ghost in the plains, lurking around, waiting for someone to come home. He looked at the temple before releasing his hand and sauntering back to the camp. All of his hope was in an 18-year-long dream, though each day felt longer than the one that came before. How was he to rise above this? Again, he fell asleep trying to meditate, trying to bring some sense of reality back into his life, but it fell flat on his face and died. In the days that followed, Master Plo Koon, one of 13 Jedi on the High Council, fell deeper and deeper into a dark depression. The droid was some sort of consolation, and speaking in the holodeck recordings, helped get things off his chest, but he went from a warrior to a shadow within seconds. How could anyone come to terms with that? Some of the most respected Jedi, in his eyes, were nothing but shells of their former selves. As he was running through the same thoughts he ran through every day of the last 7 weeks, a new noise was heard. It came from the far side of the ship. Plo, upon reaction, pulled his blade into his hands and rounded the side of the ship, igniting a lightsaber. He looked out and saw someone skidding across the sea of nothingness in a speeder. When it stopped, Plo recognized the face instantly. It was Depa Bilaba's boy, Caleb Dume. He stepped off the speeder and looked at Master Plo. There was so much brokenness in his eyes, and it shook the Jedi Master to his core. He dropped his lightsaber and asked Caleb if he was alright. He nodded his head with a weak smile. He told Master Plo that he saw the symbol on Tempest. Considering he and Depa were on Kaller, it made sense for him to go to a place where the Jedi were. He waited for a number of days, after spending weeks getting off of Kaller. It was so hard for him. He waited for a number of days, after having spent weeks getting off of Kaller. It was so hard for him. The planet wasn't the most populated, and the people were helping the Republic look for the Jedi. Caleb was already exceptionally young, having become a Padawan at age 11. As a 14-year-old, he was in a state of perpetual shock, having watched his master get slaughtered by her own men. He was afraid, but he survived. Caleb spent about a week on Tempest before he realized that it was time to go to Lothal. He was relieved to be here, but he asked if there was anyone else, and there wasn't. Plo was rather transparent with young Doom about the entire situation. He wanted him to be aware that they were in this together, as long as Caleb was willing to be here. He appreciated the welcoming from Master Plo. The Jedi Master offered up his cot to the boy, and then proceeded to sleep on the ground. He would get a cot when they needed to resupply in the coming months. Until then, perhaps sleeping on the ground would help him find balance that he needed. Reality being, it wouldn't. Plo immediately went back to helping out Caleb, which neglected his own journey through healing. the Jedi Master would give Caleb certain exercises, all of which meant to help him with letting go. Plo had been doing this, but the burden of blame still sat on his shoulders. Caleb could let go of what happened, and with Plo's training, he became more connected to the Force. Not immediately, obviously. Plo, on the other hand, didn't have that same luxury. He was part of the problem. He didn't obviously make it happen, and he wasn't on-world when it did happen. But where did he go wrong? All of his years on the High Council, how many years did he have to say something? He was on the council when Master Katri died, when Mace Windu became a member, when Sifo Dyas went missing, when Yaddle went missing, when Dooku left the Order, when Qui-Gon died, when the Battle of Geonosis happened, during and throughout the Clone Wars, and yet he, just like everyone else on that council, had no response. Plo's love for the Skywalker children and Caleb didn't cease, and he was frequently open with them, especially Caleb, in expressing how important they were for the future. However, he was stuck in his head, constantly looking for a way out of it. But how do you escape? For all he knew, 10,000 Jedi died because of him and his council. For all he knew, his failure to stop Skywalker was his own responsibility, as it was the council's. This wasn't a victim mindset, but how could he move on, knowing that all those children in the temple died looking at their hero? How could he come to terms with the reality that every generation over the last couple decades was exterminated in the manner of a few short hours? What about Huyang? Was he gone? If he was, then the Order was lost to time. Plo then began to gander over the idea that perhaps it was time for the Jedi to die off. The pessimistic route continued to plague his heart, but there was so little to hold on to. When he started on this journey, he had a fight, he had a hope, but that was before he learned there were no more Jedi. Even though he was wrong, 100 out of 10,000 was terrible. That wasn't a lot of Jedi. It wasn't a lot of hope either. It was a shambles of a once great order. Caleb knew that Plo wasn't acting right, but how could he blame him? When Caleb showed up, he knew that the Jedi Master was hopeful to learn that another council member survived. Caleb assumed that Plo was the last of the Jedi, but only he knew that there were two others. Two Jedi that Plo deeply admired. Perhaps that took the wind out of his lungs the most. The following months would repeat his cycle, hopelessness mixed with the assisting of the next generation. Luke and Leia were doing well, and thanks to the help of Caleb, he went into town and got supplies they needed, even bringing back some delicious melee runes. Plo was grateful for Caleb, but he could sense the boy wanted to move on. He wasn't afraid, which was good, because the reality is, Caleb didn't want to stay put forever. He was afraid, but Master Plo inspired him. Caleb believed he could find life amongst the stars. Plo couldn't hold him back, and he didn't want to, even though he really did. The company was nice, but Caleb had a life to try and discover. It wasn't his burden at 14 years old to fix what the council failed to handle. He wished Caleb the best on his journeys. The two of them had a communication frequency, and they promised that if they were in danger, or if Plo had to switch locations, they would let each other know. Though the frequency would be mostly for emergency, not for weekly catch-ups, only silence. They would just have to both hope that the other survived. This silence would be indefinite, and as for Plo's time on Lothal, it would continue just as the same for the next 5 years. When Caleb left, the twins had just turned 1. Now they were 6 years old. Plo hadn't made much progress in the last couple of years. He was still struggling, but he didn't let it control his way of life as the way he had before. It was a slow rebuilding process, especially because he had to care for the twins. There hadn't been any signs of Kenobi, Yoda, Doom, or anyone else. He believed that Doom was still alive, but his fear was that Yoda and Obi-Wan did something ridiculous, perhaps challenge the Emperor and lose. He didn't know, and part of him didn't want to know. What a terrible fate that would be. Plo didn't think much about it, still having avoided entering the temple here in Lothal. He was still trying to come to peace with himself. This was in part to the twins growing up. He taught them everything he knew. It was the best thing for him. He wasn't constantly overthinking about the loss of the Order or the rise of the Empire. He realized once again why he was out here alone on Lothal with 2 children. He understood that he did this for a future he would likely never see, but it was a better future than the one left behind for the twins if he didn't try. And because the Jedi Order was nothing but shambles at this point, Plo taught himself how to let go of the code in a way. He didn't reject it, he believed that'd be too far in the wrong direction. However, he allowed himself to actually love the twins, as if they were his own. It released some of the shackles surrounding his pain, but there was still so much work that needed to be done, even after 6 years. The twins were given exceptional training from one of the better instructors inside the Order. Luke and Leia were so young, but they knew more than just about any other 6-year-old in the galaxy. It was entirely due to the knowledge Plo remembered. Teaching them gave him excitement, and finally, after having spent 6 years on the planet without venturing into the temple, he would do it. though he waited until the children were sleeping. Instead of the camp being just a vessel at this point, they now had little huts, and while they were connected, Luke and Leia actually had separate rooms, so they could have their privacy. Plo didn't have a hut per se. It was more of an awning with a bed and some crates under it. When the children went to bed after an extensive day of learning about midichlorians, a topic that very frequently put them to sleep, he made his way to the temple. The Jedi Master looked up at the massive structure and raised his hand, allowing the Force to flee from his body and raise it. He looked on with a sense of pride. He didn't know if he would be able to do it or not. As he walked in, he thought about his lack of using the Force and how it may have weakened him, but as it turned out, he was still highly connected. His actual disconnect from the Force was a mental blocker rather than a physical bond. The ancient structure surrounded him, and he walked through the entrance before kneeling down in the main corridor, focusing on the Force and letting go. Within the hour, he stood up to a door opening. He looked to his sides and entered, leaving his Jedi weapon on the ground so that he may recover it when he came out. As he entered, he was transported to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. He couldn't believe his eyes, pristine as it was the day he was brought into the Order. He couldn't believe how beautiful it once was. A sense of joy and pride returned. He heard some of his friends behind him and turned to see Windu, Mundi, and Depa Billaba. They were all smiling and talking. They stopped and told Plo that they missed him. He started forward with a sense of happiness he hadn't felt since. The moment it crossed his mind, Mace cried out, his hand having been removed and lightning covering his face. Mundi and Depa were so in shock they couldn't react as clones shot them dead. Plo turned around to see the blasters and he saw Commander Wolf and Captain Rex running towards him. Plo raised his hands, ready to defend himself, before they were thrown to the side. Skywalker stepped forward, with piercing crimson eyes, holding the blade of a Sith Lord, telling the clones that he would deal with this traitor, the one who intentionally bombed an orphanage on Kata Demudia. Plo rejected the idea until Skywalker's blade swung down on top of him and he fell backwards. Luke and Leia were by his side and they asked if he was alright. They had terror in their eyes. They told him that they were scared. Someone was here looking for them. Plo grabbed his lightsaber and told the children to go further into the cave. No matter what they heard, they had no business leaving this structure. If he didn't make it, he gave them orders to stay as hidden as possible, escape if they could. He wished that the Force would be with them. An evil laugh crept through the caves, and Plo looked up to see a robotic machine standing next to Sidious. Who was that? He knew that Sidious was a Dark Lord of the Sith, but he couldn't figure out who that massive beast was. Without hesitating, Sidious launched forward and engaged. Plo defended himself as the suited man marched into the structure looking for the twins. Plo tried to stop him, but his shoulder was clipped as he turned back and fought as hard as he could. Sidious shoved him back, and before he could protect the twins, he felt a heat of 1,000 suns crawl through his chest. The twins could be seen darting out of the corner into the arms of the royal guard. And then Plo felt no nothingness. He couldn't escape it as it approached, and when he looked up, he saw nothing but darkness. The sound of a Wookiee could be heard from behind him as he turned back to see his instructor, Master Chewbacca. The Wookiee Jedi Master spoke up, asking if he had given up on himself so easily. Plo shook his head, slowly pushing himself off of his knees. The Wookiee warrior told him that there was no more fight if he was dead. Plo asked if he was. Chewbacca walked towards his student and suggested that he was as dead as the Order, the last of the Jedi, and he did nothing for the galaxy. It was truthfully shameful. The opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to make everything right, only to throw it away in a cycle of self-pity. Plo turned back and asked his master what happened now, and Chewbacca told him that he became one with the Force, doomed with knowledge of the eternal realm. The next generation would come and fix his errors, right? Perhaps they wouldn't be so down on themselves. Plo acknowledged where his master was coming from, but he wasn't able to take on the entire empire alone. Chewbacca suggested that the thought of him doing that was ridiculous. His role was to be an inspiration. Regardless of his peers or their failures, he had the opportunity to undo everything the Empire built. But that wouldn't happen now, would it? Plo looked back to his side and saw the cave at the Jedi Temple. Plo started in the direction and then stopped. Chewbacca asked what he was waiting for. Plo turned to his master and expressed that whether or not this was a vision or an epiphany, he wanted to ask if he would remember this once it was finished. Chewbacca nodded his head, telling his former student that they both would remember everything. Plo told his master that no matter the trial, the struggle, or the frustration, he always thought of his master. Plo expressed that Chewbacca helped him with so much more than he could ever know. The Wookiee Jedi smiled and told his apprentice that he always knew. Chewbacca put his hands together and bowed to his student, telling him that the Force would be with him, always. Plo mimicked his master, bowing, and then when he looked up, he was inside the temple. There was no death, no Sith, no destruction. Plo looked at his lightsaber and picked it off the ground, hoping that his master understood how important to him he was. Plo stepped out of the temple and closed it behind him. He walked to Luke and Leia's huts and saw them both sleeping. Joy filled his heart. What came next would be decided by his dedication to instruction. So Plo walked to his bed and sat down, but he felt something jabbing inside, so he lifted himself up and pulled 2 crystals out. Plo could feel it too. Both of these crystals were laced with his master's essence. They weren't his master's, but they were 2 crystals found in Lothal. In such a fashion was a show of how mysterious the Force really was. Though for Plo, it did bring him a sense of peace, believing that he was able to have one final conversation with his master. It was surreal, but also comforting. In the morning, Jedi Master Plo Koon would return. This would begin to make things right. In the coming weeks, he would explain the lineage to the Skywalker twins, their family history from what he knew, and so forth. It would also be at this point that he would introduce them to their very own kyber crystals. However, he didn't want them building lightsabers yet. That time would come. The most important thing for them to do was build a bond with their crystals. If they could create such a bond with the crystals alone, then when it came time for them to put it into their lightsabers, they would be unstoppable. He also did give his reasoning for not having done that yet, admitting that it was fear that consumed him. The twins were old enough to understand that their situation wasn't right, but with Plo's words, he was able to make sure they knew it was nothing they had done wrong. Plo made up for the lost time and pushed forward. This didn't mean he immediately overcame his internal struggles, but he slowly fought his way out of his depression and became enamored with making sure the twins became the best the fallen Jedi Order had ever seen. The next 8 years in Lothal would be peaceful. The Empire had no presence this far out in the galaxy, so Plo was able to safeguard the twins. At the same time, there were additions to his little crew. A year after Plo's turnaround, they found a boy who had been trying to figure out a way to survive on his own. Young Ezra Bridger was supposed to be looked after by Sibo, but the Rodian man never ended up doing so. However, when Plo was on one of his supply runs, he found the 7-year-old boy and immediately felt the connection. It was the same beacon of force he felt 7 years before, when they first arrived in Lothal, after Empire Day. Plo had a hard time convincing Ezra to trust him, which was understandable, but he believed that Ezra could have a home with them, and so he did. Truthfully, it was more than Plo initially could handle. The twins had their own diverse set of personality traits, but they always had each other. Ezra, on the other hand, had spent the last several months alone after his parents were captured by the Empire. So when Plo found him, he was really put off by everyone he interacted with, though the Jedi Master gave him a home and a new family, one that Ezra could have never dreamed of. Because they were staying in Lothal, Ezra was okay with not being in his family's home, leaving a message for his parents if they ever returned. This was something that Plo was unaware of. When all 3 of the children were 14, they were like triplets, as close as 3 kids the same age could be. Luke, Leia, and Ezra all thrived around each other, and with their training continuing, after Plo learned of how high Ezra's ceiling was, a return of a new order seemed like a legitimate possibility, though not everything could be perfect, because shortly after Ezra's birthday, the Empire arrived. Plo couldn't stand this anymore. The Empire had finally landed and he couldn't let the children become involved in the fight yet. So as the Empire's flags draped over the capital city of Lothal, Plo went in. The Jedi Master, having brought harmony to himself in the years since the fall of the Order, was prepared. He made a distraction and intentionally got himself captured. In the process of getting captured, he'd be brought to Tarkin's fleet in the Mustafar system. Initially, this seemed awful for him, but Plo intended on this. His plans were to lure the Emperor out and defeat him. He at this point was unaware that Darth Vader was a concept, and the Inquisitors were rather pitiful. None of them were adequately trained, and he figured that out when he was introduced to Grand Inquisitor, the best out of the group. Plo would break free inside the flagship over Mustafar, and a duel would commence between him and Grand Inquisitor. Obviously, without having fought anyone in a while, it was difficult, but he was still highly trained with the blade, now with 14 more years of experience. Just the vibration created from slamming blades together took a hot minute to get used to. Vader arrived during Plo's fight with the Grand Inquisitor, which forced the Jedi Master to retreat, especially after Vader got a lucky hit on his shoulder. Before Plo could escape, he threw Grand Inquisitor into a wall and shot Electric Judgment out at Vader's suit, which was highly damaging. Truthfully speaking, a lot more damaging than Sidious's electricity. Because while Electric Judgment wasn't meant to be harmful, Vader was full of darkness, and his suit was metallic. The Electric Judgment was used to get rid of the Dark Abyss, a beacon of light if you will. Plo's shot nearly crippled Vader's life support system, which is something Palpatine hadn't accomplished in volleys of electricity. The light would always prevail over the darkness. It was a pity the former Jedi couldn't see that. Plo felt so much disappointment, especially considering the fact that if he survived this next leg of the journey, he'd be the bearer of bad news for the twins. The fact that their father was still alive would be just as challenging as knowing who he became before he died. While Plo was setting up the next phase of the plan, the triplets, as he referred to them as, were running rampant in the streets of the capital city. Just in time, too. They wanted to make fools of the Empire until they ran into the Ghost Crew. Caleb obviously hadn't forgotten about Plo, and he planned on stopping by to see if they were still there after he completed the mission. However, sometimes one just gets lucky, because Luke, Leia, and Ezra stumbled into their little mission and ended up helping out, which led to a whole chain of events, none of which Plo would be privy to. The Jedi Master waited on Tatooine. He believed it would be perfect. If he could finish off Vader here, then perhaps he could have his peace. But that wasn't who showed up. Turns out both Grand Inquisitor and Vader informed their Emperor that they had some struggles against the Jedi Master, especially considering Vader's suit was completely shut down and he was stuck in a bacta tank, nearly in critical condition. The electric judgment had done him in. Sidious didn't understand, but he informed Grand Inquisitor that he would deal with the Jedi himself. Because Plo found balance within himself, and became more harmonized with the Force over the last 14 years, he unlocked the most radiant version of himself, one filled with the light side of the Force. He was a beacon of light, and when Sidious's shuttle landed on the planet, he could feel the darkness. Plo was waiting, stepping out of his meditation when he felt the arrival of Sidious. Plo was in total harmony with the dune seas of Tatooine, but when Sidious arrived, he was surprised. He expected Vader and Grand Inquisitor. Being that Plo needed an Imperial vessel to escape, he used their frequencies to get in contact with the fleet of Mustafar. It just turned out that neither Grand Inquisitor or Vader could show up. Grand Inquisitor wasn't a match for Plo's lightsaber skill, and while the same couldn't be said for Vader, the electric judgment component could be very deadly, especially in a place filled to the brim with sand. When Plo looked at Sidious, he felt a wave of discomfort wash over his body. Did he doubt himself in the moment? No. But he did have his own reservations about his ability to defeat the Dark Lord. Plo knew that Yoda failed. He wouldn't. Rising to his feet and showing off his skills. Sidious couldn't help but laugh as the two opponents looked at each other from across the sands. They met in the middle, their duel rocking the planet beneath them, face to face for the first time since the fall of the Republic. Jedi versus Sith. Their skill unmatched as their blades danced back and forth. They split off. Sidious was still incredibly powerful, raising his hands and shooting electricity at the Jedi Master. Plo used the Force to propel himself over him. He then used all of his strength to launch his blade into the air. Sidious lost his balance and his lightsaber, and then he looked up to the Jedi Master, his voice sounding off to himself. He was one with the Force, and the Force was with him. The light consumed the Dark Lord of the Sith, and just for a moment, Sidious understood why the Jedi maintained their values. He had just a split second to feel righteousness, peace, love, compassion, and happiness, before it all slipped away and it became nothing but dust. Plo stood with the wind blowing his cape behind him, before he dropped to his knees and looked at what remained of the Sith Lord. And he couldn't believe it. And then he slowly fell to the ground, into the sands, and felt his body go limp. He had never released so much power before. To consume darkness, it took everything he had to offer. Plo knew he couldn't wait forever, because Vader would come for him once it became clear that Sidious was gone. The Jedi Master in the coming hours would take advantage of the night and make his way for the shuttle, setting a detonation inside of it, and sending out a distress signal for Vader and Grand Inquisitor, informing him that the fight had gone badly, and he was in need of reinforcements. Plo took the Sith lightsabers and hobbled back to his ship. Plo passed out inside the starship on the way back to Lothal. When he did inevitably arrive, he didn't even realize the triplets weren't present inside the camp. He was so lightheaded. All he knew is that Palpatine's overconfidence in the dark side cost him. But Plo couldn't even feel much of his body. He was drained extensively. All he could do is hope for a moment with the triplets before he was consumed by the Force. Plo rested on his bed, and when he woke up about 5 days after the fact, he was surrounded by faces young and old. Luke, Leia, and Ezra seemed to make new friends, but so did young Caleb Dume, who by this point had become a cunning young man. The Ghost Crew was inside the camp taking refuge. A lot had happened in the last several years, most of which Plo and the triplets had been unaware of. When Plo finally woke up, Kanan helped him up and walked him over to the temple. It is like catching up to do, but Kanan was adamant that Plo understood. They were winning. He didn't understand, but as was described to him, the Jedi were rebuilding, and it was because of him. Plo was confused. What did that mean? How was that possible? No one came to Lothal since he left all those messages behind. Plo at this point didn't even remember killing Sidious. He knew something happened on Tatooine, but what it was, he was unsure. Kanan lowered Plo to the ground in front of the Jedi Temple and told him that over the years, especially since their arrival to Lothal, Obi-Wan and Yoda restarted. Plo still didn't understand, and Kanan got down to Plo's level, telling him that there were about 100 Jedi thriving. Plo looked over confusedly, and Kanan put his hand on Plo's shoulder and told him he did it. None of it made sense. The world was spinning for Plo Koon, and Kanan could tell that he was having a hard time understanding, so he fleshed it out for the Jedi Master. Obi-Wan and Yoda went into hiding on Dagobah to complete Kenobi's training, considering they weren't told by Plo where he was going. Obi-Wan, over the following days, became fed up with the desire to stay in hiding and suggested that they leave. Yoda wasn't against it, but he was controlled by fear. Obi-Wan initially wanted to find Plo, but then their mission statement changed into desire to save the lost Jedi. Yoda suggested the temple in Ashish Ri. It would be balanced out due to the temple being built on top of a Sith temple, similar to the one on Coruscant. However, Yoda decided that if they were going to use that temple, then they'd go to the Sith temple beneath it and restore it to a sense of light. It worked, but it took time. On the other side of this, they went out to the galaxy to save former Jedi, and then that list expanded to Force sensitives. The path ran through the Jedi, and it all came back to Ashish Ri. For both Kenobi and Yoda, they saw the importance of community, even with those that didn't meet the standards of the Jedi Order. While Obi-Wan was much more accepting of the predicament and their resolve to it, Yoda needed time. It was hard for him, being that he had so much time as a Grand Master. He no longer was held in such high regard. It wasn't that he was disrespected, but the younglings and Padawans had so much trauma. The Order was a broken Jedi Order. Some could be saved, but others could not. Some Jedi falling to the dark side and being taken away to the Inquisitorius. Some Jedi were killed by Vader and the Inquisitors, but a majority of them made it. The home of Ashish Ri was expanded upon for the last 14 years, and it became a hub of activity. People actively were brought into the home of the Jedi, and homes were built, constructing the people and the Jedi into a community of survivors. It was truthfully beautiful. Kanan accidentally found it after he left Lothal. He didn't stay long, and that would be how he found Hera and started Phoenix Squadron. Kanan then continued and expressed to Plo that he was the reason for all of it. He may have not known it, and he maybe wouldn't remember this, but it was his doing. Plo just nodded his head. He placed his hand on Kanan's shoulder and thanked him for coming home. He worried for him for the longest time, and he was proud of the man he became. Kanan just smiled and thanked him. The two of them sat in silence in front of the Jedi Temple for a good couple of hours. When they were finished, they returned to the camp so Plo could see the triplets and spend time with them. It became clear during the meditation that Plo would be consumed by the Force. He was unaware when that might happen. He released so much energy during his fight with Sidious that he doomed himself. With death staring him in the face, he realized the depths of his longevity. For Plo, it wasn't about legacy. That didn't matter to him. The Order he knew was long gone. But what he cared about was a family he had constructed here in Lothal. The triplets were everything to him. He taught them everything he knew up until this point, and he would continue to do that until his life came to an end. The Jedi Master went to his students, all three of them old enough to know the fate of their respective parents. Ezra's were gone. Same went for Luke and Leia's. He was the closest thing they had to a father. The only difference for Ezra's was that he knew his parents, but Plo was at the moment a father for him. The news hit them hard, but they were accepting of it. Plo then explained what caused this, and he would do everything within his power to make sure that their future was theirs, that they didn't have to fight the fight that he and his council failed. They were some of the highest trained Jedi the former Order had ever seen. Plo's expertise in pulling out the best of his students showed with the three of them. When they were all in training, he explained it to them as such, due to the differences between the twins and Ezra. Plo at the time said that the Force could be a trickle, a stream, a river, or a flood, for anyone who could sense it. The Force wasn't about being stronger. Luke and Leia weren't stronger. He reassured Ezra, just as he did the twins, to think of themselves as doors. The wider they could open each of their doors, the more easily the Force could flow through them. For Luke and Leia, their doors just started out a bit more open, but he reminded them that their door and any door could be opened wider. The triplets took this knowledge into their minds and allowed it to accelerate their training. Shortly after Plo informed his triplets that he was dying, Hera came running out of the Ghost to inform them that the Empire was pulling off of Lothal. She revealed that the Emperor had died and the galaxy was stepping backwards. The Senate was in a gridlock for control over the entire Empire with Masameda. The trouble began on Coruscant. Vader sent a couple of Inquisitors out to Tatooine to find Palpatine, and they were killed in the blast to destroy the shuttle. Vader then realized that he needed control, though, due to the lack of public spotlight, he needed someone else. This forced him to make a deal with Masameda so they could recapture the Senate and make sure there wasn't a rebellion. Though the fire had already been lit, thanks to little cells of rebels across the outer and mid-rims, the death of Palpatine became a rallying cry. It was apparent the Empire would struggle continuously without the rule of Palpatine, and there was no successor. No plan in mind for how the galaxy might handle the disappearance of the Emperor. Vader took control of the military side of things, but there was already an issue. Because Palpatine kept Vader on a short leash, he now had competing interests. Many of the Imperial Moffs believed they were first in line to be a successor, and they all made a beeline for Coruscant to put their name in the hat. They wanted the power and the credits that came along with being the Emperor. Of course, it didn't stop there. The chain of command was filled to the brim with power-obsessed officers that wanted to seize their power. The Empire pulled all of its external fleets back to the core to make sure they didn't lose their central power system. It was strenuous, and for Vader it felt like the beginning of the end, especially due to the Moffs. But over the coming days, weeks, and months, everything would become stable once more, and the Empire would stand tall again. Though an important side effect to come of the Emperor's retreat from the Outer and Mid-Rims were the rise of the Alliance. With a weak Imperial presence, there was no need to be afraid. The Empire had already become more cruel, and when there wasn't anyone watching the people, they made it clear that they didn't want tyranny to control them anymore. The rise of a resistance was growing, and it was united. Back in Lothal, Plo decided he had more lessons to teach his students, most of them highlighting the importance of the Jedi Way. He knew that they would take it to heart, and that as this generation's representation of the Chosen Ones, he knew that they would end the Empire. He believed that much at least. Master Plo focused on lessons that didn't revolve around the lightsaber. He had done most of the important lessons revolving around lightsaber training before his fight with Sidious. In his experience, students that learned lightsaber forms before adulthood typically became better duelists. At least that was the case with Dooku, so he spent a good part of the 2 or 3 years training them to wield lightsabers in their own personal styles. The twins used Form 5 and Ezra used Form 4, which was great because Plo knew both of them, especially since Form 5 was his main form to use. Since he was too weak to use his blade anymore, he taught lessons in the Force. They had been inside the temple before they were used to using it as lessons. Plo's specific lessons were things he learned over the years before the temple fell, and even as recent as within the last few weeks. Luke, Leia, and Ezra were all accepting and ready of this. It was hard though, but they treasured every single moment with Plo. Kanan even stayed put on Lothal to continue training with him. But the Ghost Crew wasn't going anywhere, so they didn't leave him behind. Instead, it was interesting for the other members of the Ghost Crew to see a Jedi Master in action. The lessons were very quick for Plo, barely making it through any of them, falling to the ground a couple of times and even passing out. It was all very stressful and very saddening for those very close to him, but it was what he wanted to do. Before the end of his life, when Luke, Leia, and Ezra were each 16, he was visited by Obi-Wan and Yoda, each of them far older than they were the last time they saw Plo. Kanan and the Ghost did leave a few times, because Plo was living much longer than he even thought he would live. During one of their departures, they stopped off at Ash's Ray and informed the Jedi about their friend. The visit was heart-wrenching, but Yoda and Obi-Wan saw that Plo was doing what he loved the most. He was teaching, helping others, and spending time with those who meant the most to him. When Kenobi and Yoda left, Master Plo would teach his final lesson, one that took the triplets and Kanan into the temple itself. They had their own respective visions, and when they were finished, he brought them out into the fields of the planet. He told them all that the Force breathed through this planet, and every single one of them. It did the same with every person in the galaxy. The 4 of them already knew this, but he continued. He expressed that in his journey, he realized that no one is ever really gone. There was always hope for change. There was always a chance for redemption. Kenobi and Yoda showed that, and there'd be a chance for others to show their capability of change as well. Whether it be Jedi, Sith, people, Inquisitors, Imperials, and whatnot. He then expressed that while this meaning could go exclusively for the living, it did go for those who passed on. His time was coming. He could feel it. He would always be with them, no matter how alone they may be. They could always look to the Force and he'd be right there with them. His final lesson was one of connection, not just with themselves and their closest family and friends, but with those they might not know and those that had moved on. The Force was strong with each of them, and they were the next generation. And while it may have been scary to think about, they had the courage, the strength, the perseverance, and the determination to be the guiding hand of an afraid galaxy. His lesson was followed by personal messages given to each of them, as well as hollow recordings left behind. His personal messages were what he could tell them in the moment. The recordings were something he had worked on the last 2 years, a diary if you will, one holding his thoughts and excitement for each one of them. It was a time capsule. There was even one that he gave to Hera so that she could share it with the rest of Ghost Crew. He told each of them that he would stick with them for their entire lives. Plo told Luke that he was strong and courageous, but courage only took him so far, reminding him that he needed to have the courage to be gentle. He also had no need to be afraid of the future. It was always emotion. No matter what he faced, he would handle it and persevere. He just needed the trust that he would. With Leia, he told her that she was wise, discerning, forthright, and fearless. Her attributes didn't just make her a good Jedi, but a leader, reminding her to never be afraid of who she was. People would follow her. She needn't question their intentions for doing so. When it came time for Ezra, Plo knew he would laugh, because that's who Ezra was. Plo told him to never lose his humor, because it would serve him well even when he least expected it. His determination never needed to be questioned, but he always needed to remember that his challenges would be determined by his attitude. Keeping his head up would garner him the results he was more than capable of receiving. Then he got to Kanan, the eldest of the four he would talk to. Plo told Kanan that he was a big brother. The triplets would look up to him once he was gone. Plo reminded Kanan that his heart shined brighter than any star, and he was fully capable of anything. His resilience would prove to be defining in this moment of challenge. He then reassured Kanan by telling him to never lose faith in himself. He had the gift that so many wished they had, suggesting that Kanan stop searching for the gift within others. The answers he needed would always come. Plo spent the last night by the fire, the same way his first night on Lothal started. Though this time, Plo was surrounded by a family, one he could have never predicted. A general's daughter, a Lasat honor guard, a Mandalorian, 2 psychotic droids, a Jedi Knight, Skywalker twins, and Jabba the Hutt. It was a night that wasn't quiet. Instead, it was full of laughs, memories, stories, excitement, and rejoice, as Plo reminded everyone to not mourn his passing. Rejoice in his unity with the living force. The point of saying this was not saying that they couldn't be upset, but don't let his death hold them back. He'd become one with the Force, and that was okay. When everyone went to sleep, Leia with her head against Plo's right shoulder and Luke on the opposite side, he listened to the instructions that he'd been given by Yoda and Obi-Wan. His body transcended into the living Force and left for the netherworld. When everyone woke up, all that remained were his robes. Plo Koon had become one with the Force. His story may have come to an end in the mortal realm, but his journey was just beginning. Everyone was saddened by his death, but the resolve had never been stronger. They knew what to do, and they understood their purposes now. They would all go out and help an afraid galaxy. Luckily for the triplets, they had a vessel, and the Empire was shrinking. All they needed to do was be effective at rounding up people for their cause. The ghosts left Lothal, and their journey outwards began. The triplets would continue their instruction with Kanan, which was something he feared he was unprepared for, but thanks to Plo's message and holo recordings, he was ready. It just took a moment for him to realize that he had the right stuff to be the Jedi they needed him to be. Despite Ghost Crew being small and fitting 3 extra bodies and another droid into the ship, they were extremely effective at making things work. The triplets had space, Leia rooming up with Sabine, and Zeb sharing space with Ezra and Luke. It was much tighter, but it worked. The Ghosts traveled to the Mid-Rim and bolstered support for the rebellion, and without an Imperial presence, they were inspiring. Their efforts did not go in vain, as Imperial loyalists started to lose favor and be ousted from their respective positions inside of office. With only Imperial troopers, not stormtroopers, stationed out this far in the galaxy, it didn't take much. The only naval support the Empire had were Imperial light cruisers, and due to the long-time established alliance, thanks to the Jedi on Ashish Ri, the rebellion had a proper means to taking down light cruisers and causing mass disruption across the mid and outer rim. Luke, Leia, and Ezra were truly forces to be reckoned with. Thanks to the aid from Senator Organa, he hooked the 3 of them up with 3 different squads of rebels, which meant they all, at the age of 16, were leading groups of rebels in the cities and planets across the mid-rim to rally support for their cause. This also did mean that the Ghost went from an extra 3 members down to 3 members, but it was alright. They were supportive, and Ghost even encountered them on a number of occasions. All of Plo's instructions towards the triplets became reality the moment they split up. They were obviously stronger together. They each had their own individual glow-ups outside their trio though. It was just helpful to have some room to breathe alone. Though with the rise of the alliances outside the Empire, it was clear to Vader that it was time for retaliation. The Empire quickly cracked down on the rebels, sending out Grand Admiral Thrawn to deal with the insurgents. However, there was already an issue. Thrawn was sent out because the Moffs weren't governing each of their own sections of the galaxy. They had broke off from their stations and allowed the rebellion to grow. They were so obsessed with greater power that they reduced any chance for the Empire to actually sustain said power without the Emperor. Mas Amedda had a voice, but calls from the Senate led to Senators Organa and Mothma, forcing him into a predicament. The Senate clearly wanted him out, and wanted someone new in. He tried to restrict the democratic process, which was working, but Bail and Mon quickly worked around that, forcing their way in and getting people to vote. All that was needed now was Mas to slip up, because they were just a little shy of the support they needed. Mas was thinking about killing off those who resisted him, and Vader was becoming impatient, coming up with an idea himself. During one Senate session, he joined Mas Amedda and killed him in front of the entire Senate, thrusting his lightsaber through his back more specifically. Vader then informed the entire Senate that he would be the leader of the Empire. all the Moffs would return to their sectors and stop the rising rebellion. Vader's show of force was met with hostility, until such hostility was met with an Imperial force. Stormtroopers went to each Senate pod and raised their weapons. Vader made it clear that he was the Emperor. Anyone who denied that would be killed. Simply put, don't test Lord Vader. Though the trouble looming became something not even he could escape, his Inquisitors were slowly dying off. While Grand Inquisitor wasn't killed in the blast on Tatooine, he was killed by Kanan Jarrus over Malastare instead of Imperial Star Destroyer. Apparently a C-1 type astromech was responsible for destroying the entire vessel. How could a droid destroy an entire Star Destroyer? Because Sidious had been gone for so long, there was no route to the Death Star, and the Empire was falling behind on star tech advancements, which were costing them battles against the growing Alliance. With most Imperial fleets hidden in the core, Vader sent Moffs, Admirals, and Grand Admirals out into the galaxy with their Imperial fleets to do the work of the Empire. Though the saving grace for the Empire had become nothing but a dream of a dying tyranny. The Skywalker twins had their moment of bravery in a harrowing assault led by the triplets over Eridu, one that resulted in the death of Grand Moff Tarkin. They awoke a beast. Vader sent his best fleet along with himself down to the system to cripple the Alliance. The triplets were integral in a two-part battle. General Syndulla led a fighter assault with Admiral Raddus leading an assault from his capital ship. The Alliance may have had less heavy hitters, but the combined leadership from rebel leaders, plus the battle on the ground, led to an Imperial defeat. Tarkin was inside of his personal Star Destroyer. It would be the second one of his destroyers obliterated by Chopper. However, this time Chopper would make sure he claimed the life of Grand Moff Tarkin. On the ground, Ezra led a group of rebels into the generator room to shut it down. Not just the shields over the city, but the turbo lasers and hypervelocity cannon. The hypervelocity cannon was a ground-to-orbit weapon. However, due to the maneuverability of the rebel fleet, it couldn't land a successful hit. The weapon was actually a huge waste of credits. Luke and Leia, on the other hand, led an attack on the Imperial fighter facility. It was a ground hangar bay, and because of their assault, they stopped the doors from opening, which cut off support to the fight in orbit. To make things better, the remaining Inquisitors challenged the twins and were subsequently killed for their attempt to stop the Jedi warriors. Their presence was revealed to Vader quickly, which is why he came to the planet, to kill the Jedi. To lose such a powerful planet so far away from the core could be detrimental to their efforts. Elsewhere, Thrawn was struggling to contain cells of broken Jedi, who were operating alongside elite rebel units scrounged together from around the galaxy. On Eridu, Vader's fleet arrived. By this point, it was made clear that the rebels weren't going to provide a fight in space. Not against Vader's fleet at least. So a ground army was deployed. The battle that ensued was a two-way street. Rebels on the ground accompanied by triplets had to fend off not just the Empire trying to approach through the front gates, which were guarded by a shield generator and turbo lasers, but also Imperial loyalists from behind them. Ezra alongside Kanan and the Ghost crew led the resistance against the loyalists. They all had their weapons set for stun, no need to kill confused citizens. At the same time as all of this, Chopper and Sabine manned the hypervelocity cannon and began dumping rounds into Imperial Star Destroyers, which was extremely effective. Vader led his army towards the gates and bursted through after losing several heavy tanks and troopers. The city was in chaos, and the Loyalists were quickly seeing why there was a rebellion. Stormtroopers targeted everyone, didn't matter who, and killed them. There was no choice to surrender, only execution. This turned some of the Loyalists immediately, while others saw it as accidental, though accidentally using force wouldn't include burning down buildings. Was it the rebels' fault or the Empire's? It wasn't like the rebels occupied the city for that long anyways, not long enough to turn anybody. They were friendly and expressed a desire to free them. There was no harsh rule. Regardless, Vader got ambushed by the twins, when he least expected it to. He toyed with them. His lightsaber skills were far more advanced due to time. But these two, eager, quick, and very well trained 17-year-olds, were unlike anything he'd ever dealt with, at least since the fall of the Order. He hadn't faced a true challenge since Mustafar. Now he was fighting for his life. The two of them bounced back and forth, trying to win the battle. Vader was able to hold his own, throwing the twins back as they regathered and spread out, having done the same exercise with Master Plo, before his fight with Sidious at least. The twins came in at two different directions. Vader blocked and swung. He missed the first strike before Leia lifted her blade up and cut right through his mask, which threw him to the ground. Luke turned back after having been blocked away, and he saw the face of Anakin Skywalker. He felt so much pity for him, and with a gut reaction, called out to him, the word father etching out of his mouth. Vader turned to Luke with confusion, and their eyes met. You could see it in Luke's eyes. He had the same eyes as Anakin Skywalker. Leia turned back over and looked at her brother and then her father, before raising her lightsaber. Luke put his hand up, saying that their father was somewhere in there. She declined the idea, not having seen the ravaged face of Anakin Skywalker. His eyes turned over to her, and he could see the eyes of Padme Amidala within her own. How could he not recognize them? Both twins could see the confusion on his face, and they demanded that he stand down. Vader was flipping in and out of Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker. He had the potential to have all the power in the galaxy. He asked them if they were really his children, and they were. But how could they associate themselves with someone so evil? Vader rose to his feet, trying to figure out what to say, and then he found it, telling them to join him. He could help them establish anew. Before he could finish the words, he was launched across the chambers with the Force. His body slammed into the wall, and the twins turned over to Ezra, who walked in with a cocky smile and shrugged his shoulders. He said he didn't want them to be pulled over to some world that didn't exist. They expressed that they weren't going to join Vader, but their father was still within that husk of a suit. The triplets turned over and looked at Vader as he climbed out of the rubble, telling them that they would pay for what they did. Luke's hand twisted around the blade tighter, as did Ezra's, but Leia saw what Luke originally saw, telling the three of them to remember what Master Plo said before he died. The two boys looked over and thought back to the notion that no one was ever really gone. Ezra always assumed it was in relation to the Jedi. Luke thought for a moment and asked if she thought that Plo knew Anakin would return. Vader stumbled over his feet, searching for his lightsaber. Luke turned back, calling his father by name, Anakin, and Vader stumbled to the ground, crashing down with his breathing unsteady. He told the boy that Anakin was gone. He was all that remained. The notion was shocking and heartbreaking all the same, as the girl told her father that what he believed didn't need to be a reality. The light was pulling Anakin back, but the darkness was so comforting. Forcing himself to be an evil monster was all he had known since the fall of the Republic. Now, he would have to be uncomfortable. He'd have to understand why he couldn't force his control into everything. He'd have to be okay with being human and having mistakes, not chasing power. Leia told her father that all he needed to do was release the darkness. Luke shot into his father, telling him that all of this was a figment of his imagination. Ezra joined in, not knowing how to help but trying his best. The words continued to dig into Vader's mind as he tried to resist the pull of the light, but he couldn't. He wasn't capable of staying away from it. The pull was too strong. No matter how strong one might think the dark side is, nothing compares to the light. Vader couldn't escape this, even if he wanted to. Vader stumbled forward, and his lightsaber slipping out of his grip as his metallic fist slammed down into the ground below him. Tears slipped from his eyes, watering the floor as he choked over his words. He told them that he was sorry. So sorry. He didn't know how it got so far. He didn't know how to make up for all he had done. His eyes looked up and his gaze met the twins. They both deignited their weapons and told him that this could be fixed. They each walked forward slowly, keeping their eyes on each other, to be sure that they were confident in their approach. Anakin said that all of his life, he did everything he could for those he loved, and he finally realized that it wasn't for them, it was selfishly for himself. Padme would have never wanted to die, but she especially would never want Anakin to suffer like this. Qui-Gon would have never wanted Anakin to go down this dark path, neither would Obi-Wan. All the people that looked up to him wouldn't want to be slaughtered by him, so he could be the one to kill his wife. Anakin, at the end of all of it, realized that the last 17 years of his children's lives were wasted. He was on the other side of the galaxy, chasing power, submitting people to the rule of the Empire, and forcing oppression on an unwilling galaxy. He shouldn't have been doing that. He should have stayed put. He should have been there for the twins, even if Padme died. He should have been the father they needed, and now he could see it. At the end of everything he'd done, he realized how much he had taken from others to fill a hole in his heart created by himself. He looked to his twins and admired how beautiful they were. He expressed that perhaps in another life, they could have been a family. Maybe not with Padme, maybe with her. He didn't know. But perhaps in that other life, instead of burning the galaxy to the ground, he taught Luke how to swing a lightsaber, or teach Leia how to lift boulders. Perhaps in that same life, they could have gone on family camping trips to Ossus and shared ghost stories by the campfire. Maybe in that life, the twins could have had a father figure and had themselves a family. What made all this more tragic is that perhaps it'd be something that Skywalker would never learn. It's that Plo filled that role. He taught them everything their real father should have taught them. He gave them stories, excitement, love, and paternity. Plo gave them fulfilling relationships and did everything he spent an entire life rejecting because he saw how lovely they were. That was a scar that Anakin could never mend, not just for himself but for his children. 2 children raised by a man that looked nothing like them, fighting off demons that were far from the children's control. Anakin stood up shakily and walked over to the children calmly, without his Sith weapon. He looked to both of them and asked if he may. Luke nodded his head, before Leia did. Anakin reached his hand out and gently placed them onto their shoulders and told them that they're the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. They were so gorgeous, and he wished that perhaps he could get to know them. But that wasn't what would happen now. Before he stepped forward, he told them that he would like the chance to make things right. He thanked them for taking a chance on him, for giving him a moment to enjoy them, before he looked at them both in the eyes again. A small smile formed across the left side of his mask as he told them both that their mother would have adored them. Anakin knew that Ezra wasn't his, but he gave the kid a wink before he departed. Luke and Leia were almost devastated, but they were confused too. Their emotions couldn't be understood. They just hoped that their father could have peace. Vader died the moment he saw the twins, and so Anakin Skywalker returned to Coruscant. It wasn't easy getting off world, but he didn't care anymore. Using what he had learned from an explosion during the Clone Wars, Skywalker filled an entire Imperial destroyer up with Rhydonium, and brought every single system and major fleet to Coruscant. The reality is, Anakin knew the truth about this predicament. He had done so much wrong in the last 17 years. Maybe he didn't destroy a planet, maybe he wasn't personally enslaving people, but he took control over the Senate. He forced his will onto the collective people of the galaxy after killing Masameda. He was the bad guy, the villain, and it was his choice to do all of that. Once the Alliance won, he'd be killed. Instead of dying like a villain, instead of being like Palpatine or the Inquisitors or the Empire, dying out in the resistance to an overbearing light, he would accept it, he'd partake in it, and he'd give the galaxy the fireworks needed to start their celebration of freedom. When the fleet assembled, he ignited his lightsaber in the bay of the destroyer. He raised the weapon above his head and closed his eyes. He could see his family, Padme and the twins. His blade sank downwards. He could feel it the moment his arm dropped. The nightmares, the pain, the suffering, all of it was over. The Sith would be extinct. The Empire would fall. His children would have the life they deserved, and he felt it. All at once. A lifetime full of slavery finally coming to its beautiful end. Once the blade connected him with the canister, he felt one sense of relief, and it was freedom. The orbit of Coruscant erupted into an array of colors, spanning the entire spectrum. It was beautiful. Truly something magnificent. It didn't give the Empire too much time. Admiral Thrawn stood on the Chimera, watching Vader's flagship sit idly before it was consumed in a beautiful wave of colors, before simultaneously being destroyed. The majority of the Imperial fleet was ripped to shreds. Claiming all that Rhydonium obviously took some time, but Vader was the Emperor. He got what he wanted. The explosion was the largest one since the creation of the galaxy, and it did accidentally do some atmospheric damage to Coruscant, but it was something that could be fixed with some time. The Empire crumbled, and the triplets were a part of the Navy that liberated the core. There were some skirmishes, but it was very apparent that the whole of the Empire was finished. There were standing armies, and they resisted, but the Alliance was stronger than ever before. When the galaxy saw the Senate being held hostage, they knew that there was no order. Everything was a figment of their imagination. The Alliance that grew from the first pullback from the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim were able to cultivate an audience. Super loyal worlds obviously continued being loyal, but the truth is, nothing could stop the rise of the Alliance. When Coruscant's colors turned from Imperial to New Republic, it was clear the game was won by the Alliance. With prime members of the early established Alliance still around, they were able to guide the Empire into its transitional period. This included Ryochuchi, Mon Mothma, and Bail Organa. The vocalness against the Empire was seen as revisionary, and those within the Senate trusted their intuition in this very important rebuilding process for the New Republic, as it was now being called. The triplets broke off. Luke and Leia went to continue their roots as they went to Ashes Re to find the collective new Jedi Order, while Ezra went with the Ghost Crew. Yoda was waiting for the twins when they arrived, as he welcomed them to the planet, and expressed that he wished them well on their future journeys. This new order would be welcoming to them, if they wanted to be a part of it, though there was uncertainty. Luckily for the twins, someone of reason was around to guide them forward. His name was Chirrut, and he was a blind Force-sensitive man, a guardian of the wills from the ancient city of Jedha. Chirrut would be the new father figure for the twins, closer to a grandfather, as they joined this continually growing order of broken Jedi. It was a community of around 14,000, but active Jedi members were closer to 890. It was still hard for people to feel inclined to be able to trust using the Force, so they stayed in the community because it was safe. But when the New Republic flags were raised across the galaxy, about half the community left. The other half liked their home here with people who were similar to them. Chirrut didn't use the Force like a regular Jedi, but he was very connected and understanding of it, thanks to his blindness, ironically. Baz was here with Chirrut, but he wasn't a part of the Jedi like his friend was. Luke and Leia were very inspired, and like they were in the beginning of their fight against the Empire, they trusted each other to break off and go in their own separate directions, both of them becoming Jedi Knights, just like Kanan Jarrus. Ezra had the time of his life with the Ghost Crew. Sabine returned to her people on Mandalore, and Zeb went back to the Lasat homeworld to be with his people as he rebuilt their society from ash. Hera and Kanan had a child, and Ezra would bounce in and out of their lives, but the crew always kept close and reunited frequently. Initially, Luke would become extremely invested in the Order, and then Leia would become extremely invested in the Order as Luke's interest decreased. It was funny, the way the twins were. They would just switch roles. One would be more interested than the other, and then it would flip. Eventually, Leia would take on a student of her own and become an instructor. Obi-Wan never got too involved with either twin, but he was also so happy to see how far along they came because of Master Plo. There was so much adoration for Plo in this new order that about 4 years after the Empire fell, the community would be brought back along with every single Jedi in the Order, as Yoda's last wish would be the raising of Master Plo Koon's statue at the front of the Ashes-free temple. Obviously, the triplets and Kanan were there to see it. Ezra would be the last of the triplets to join the Order, but he'd also do so with the intention of being the biggest goober inside the Order. While this new Jedi Order didn't have the same structure as the one that came before, it wasn't as important. There was a council that was brought into power by every single Jedi inside the Order. The community that stayed on Ashes-Ree also had a vote. There were also some core codes, but they were applied to those that wished to follow them. If the Jedi wanted to be like the Order of old, then they may. But many Jedi were like the triplets, having a sense of emotion and care outside of what the code permitted. Because of the way the Order was established and kept in order, many of the artifacts in the previously established Order were maintained and kept in good condition. Professor Huyang would be instrumental in the future of this Order. Though, out of the three triplets, Leia would be the first one to reach the rank of Master. When the twins finally met Ahsoka, they could exchange stories. The time they had with Master Plo and the time she had with her father. It was truthfully such a wonderful time. The galaxy was healing. It was greatly in part to the last lesson Plo shared with his students. The Skywalker twins would go on to be the lasting legacy of this new Order, and the same would go for their brother, Ezra Bridger. With the galaxy saved, it was time for this new generation to leave their mark on a people so ready for peace. And that, my friends, that's a movie, honestly. Again, special thanks to Gallivant Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewoo 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Toaster Oven, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Jedi Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Geek Gamer, Lord Calic, Only 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Force Lately Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with Three First Names, Darksaint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button to see long stories like this, I suppose. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out the Patreon. There are 2 more episodes left in Season 2 of the Sith Clone Wars. I hope we can do in Season 3. Very anxious to do that. Anyways, let's spot the story. So we've done stories with individuals raising Luke and Leia, and the motto I wanted to focus on is having a character like Plo, who've never seen have these deep brooding emotions, kind of challenge them and face those challenges head on and really kind of deal with it, because I don't think it's talked about enough, like the effect of what Order 66 would have on Jedi, especially Jedi Masters, because his role as a council member, just as anyone else on the council, is to do what's best for the Order, despite what they personally want for themselves. And so, as a council member, he's going to bear the burden of what happened in some way, shape, or form. So, covering that with a character like Plo is a lot of fun to do. I don't really have much else to say, though. The story really speaks for itself. I really hope you enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.